Rakesh has been my student, so there might be a little bit of nepotism out there, but hopefully the lecture will transcend that inherent limitation, as it were, right? So I've retired formally from academia, and post-retirement has actually one preoccupation within my post-retirement agenda has been integrating or consolidating my own teaching and research. And one crucial component in that teaching and research has been how to bring together theory and methods. Okay, what is taught as sociological theory and what is taught as sociological methods as part of a standard sociology curriculum. Okay, and I think it is that actually that impulse to bring theory and methods together also translated into a course that I taught towards the last 5 or 6 years of my stint at Hyderabad, which was called Knowing the Social World. And a lot of the concerns that I'm going to express are part of that course that I taught and so on. But I still think there is something different or novel in what I'm attempting here, in the sense of trying to kind of formulate some kind of a framework from within which some of the dominant concerns of integrating theory and methods can be brought together. I actually think it's important. I mean, it's again, and even as I try to integrate those concerns, there is also a notion that I want to feed off, namely reflexivity, right? And that's why the title is called On Reflexivity in Sociological Inquiry. And the second part of the title, the subtitle called Design Requirements. So there is something formal and integrative that I'm trying to do here in instituting what I'm calling as the design requirements for reflexivity, or embodying a certain practice of reflexivity in sociological inquiry or social scientific inquiry more generally. I think the word design requirements also implies that there is nothing conclusive about what I'm indicating here. I mean, these are requirements, and as I'm formulating these, they are necessary requirements, but whether these are sufficient is perhaps an open question, right? Etc. In the way in which I'm formulating it as design requirements, there is something mandatory in the issues that I'm trying to posit out here. But whether they are sufficient to kind of venture into the problems that are larger part of sociological inquiry is a separate question altogether, etc. Now, I think a part of my title also invokes aspects which are traceable to one of the doyens of contemporary sociology, the late Pierre Bourdieu, right? In fact, particularly his invitation to a reflexive sociology that he speaks about, and so on. Okay, but I think the design requirements that I am invoking are of a different, very different order, right? But let me just make a reference to Bourdieu, and if there are substantive questions about Bourdieu and the reflexivity that he tries to record, I could take that up in discussion. But I'm trying to say that the design requirements that I'm trying to institute here about reflexivity in sociological inquiry are somewhat removed from the kind of reflexivity that Bourdieu's work epitomizes, as it were, right? But just a word about Bourdieu, which is, I think, important because I've invoked the figure. For Bourdieu, broadly, very broadly, reflexivity meant uh, as a kind that all knowledge producers, right, must strive to uh, recognize their own objective positions within the field of intellectual production or in the intellectual and academic field, right? So there is a certain foregrounding of the researcher or the analyst or the observer, so to say, or the knowledge producer, so to say, and a certain demand that is placed upon knowledge producers to actually recognize their own objective position in the intellectual and academic field, right? In fact, Bourdieu is very clear that more than any other set of intellectuals, sociologists, particularly, more than others, should should work to what he calls objectify theory and practice, right? By engaging in what he calls the sociology of sociology, right? Okay, and so on. So there is a certain objectivating impulse that undergirds Bourdieu's work, and there is and I am comfortable with that objectivating impulse, but somewhere along the way, that objectivating impulse also translates into some set of deterministic moves, right? And I think my own diffidence about Bourdieu's sociology, or the pitching of reflexivity in sociological inquiry along the lines that he does, have to do essentially with that deterministic impulse that undergirds a lot of his sociological theory and practice. Uh, uh, I, I, I'm, I'm more in, I'm more trying to focus on the agential aspects, okay, and a lot of the design requirements that I'm going to institute for reflexivity in sociology, in a manner of speaking, are moving away from the kind of determinism that undergirds a lot of Bourdieu's work, and into a more agential perspective, which is not to imply that one is instituting a new binary between, that something agential need not necessarily imply totally voluntaristic, etc. But I will clarify that point later if it comes up in discussion. But what I'm trying to indicate is that these design requirements that I'm trying to highlight are working with definitely a more robust sense of the enterprise of knowledge, but not necessarily translating into some of those deterministic moves or objectivating moves that you can read into Bourdieu's work. I've actually reflected on this in terms of what are the misgivings that Bourdieu has on what he calls the scholastic position, and the need to think about reflexivity in sociology, and reflexivity more on what he calls scientific reflexivity, rather than, say, a phenomenological reflexivity or a reflexivity that comes with the postmodern turn in anthropology and so on. Okay, so I'm aware of all of that, but I think there is something, another set of considerations that bear on this enterprise, and I want to keep this reflections on reflexivity in sociological inquiry separate from the kind of demands that Bourdieu makes for a sociology of sociology as the heartpin or the linchpin of reflexivity in sociological inquiry, right? Now, for the purposes of the lecture, I've tried to formalize this set of design requirements along 4 axes. Okay, please note this is only a formalization, some kind of an analytical schema, okay, which of course is subject to revision, but there is also, and I present them quite sequentially, right? Although I mean, somebody could say that no. I mean, maybe the sequentiality that I'm positing could be a problem, and that is there ways by which that sequentiality that oversees the 4 design requirements that I set up could be kind of ordered and so on, right? But as I said, I think there is something. I mean, I'm not saying that this sequentiality is the only sequentiality on which the design requirements could be formulated, but rather what I'm saying is that there is something about the way I set it up which requires a certain sequentiality to flow from each other, that I raise particular sets of problems in relation to each of those design requirements that I'm setting up, right? So that's why I speak of 4 sets of problems as part of these design requirements, which I call first and to be formulated in that sequential manner in which my lecture might even proceed, is what I call the truth problem, the morality problem, the normativity problem, and the value problem, right? I do recognize that there could be a lot of overlap between what I'm saying under each of those rubrics, okay? But I think there is a sense in which each of those rubrics announces is something very distinct and apart from each other. So the way I label them could be, I mean, one could label them differently, but I think there are problems that I want to set apart in those labels that I have instituted as the truth problem, the morality problem, the normativity problem, and the value problem, right? Etc. Okay. Now, let me take up the first, what I call the truth problem. And I think it's important to start here, okay, because even as the problem announces certain kinds of issues and which can be tackled, that in their tackling, there are other kinds of questions that come up, as it were. So an answer to the truth problem in the way I formulate it may not necessarily may not be sufficient to address some of the other kinds of puzzles and problems that I'm raising in the context of those other labels, as it were, right? So let me, I mean, I think the truth problem, as I put it, is how to reconcile, and I'll give a background to this as I'll illustrate the problem presently. How do we reconcile between claims to be on the side of truth or on the side of reality, okay, or claims about getting it right about the social world, okay, or writing a real history, as it were, okay, how do we reconcile that impulse with strains of thought that proclaim a certain perspectivism about truth, okay? And I know the word perspectivism is a loaded word, and it has come to acquire a loaded connotation, especially with developments in theory today. But I'm using the word perspectivism here in a very, very simple fashion, namely the claim that truth is relative to a standpoint or perspective, right? That every claim emanates from somewhere, and that truth is relative to a standpoint or a perspective. Now, I've said, how do we reconcile the two, right? I mean, and the problem arises in the context of this effort to reconcile between claims to be on the side of reality or getting the social world right, our understanding of the social world right, and saying that no, every truth is relative to a standpoint. I think this problem that I'm setting up for you in the simple fashion that I am, I think is best epitomized in standpoint theory. Standpoint, or or standpoint epistemology. I mean, coming from, say, somebody like Sandra Harding, or even, for that matter, Donna Haraway and others. It's not as though the feminist scholarship that undergirds a lot of this theorizing is not aware of the problems that are associated with it. Okay, but many a times the answers to the problem do not actually translate into solutions to the problem. But I don't go into alternative solutions, because I'm saying these are design requirements. So I'm setting it up, and I think depending upon ways in which you develop it, you can develop it along the lines. But how do I say that the truth problem, in a manner of speaking, hangs over one of the most lucid and perhaps engaging perspectives, engaging theoretical orientations that we have in contemporary sociology, namely standpoint theory, okay, or standpoint epistemology. I think it's best epitomized, because there are two assumptions that underlie standpoint theory. Right? I mean, standpoint is not just standpoint theory, at least in the way in which Haraway formulates it, and in a manner of speaking, also Sandra Harding formulates it, and in a manner of speaking, Donna Haraway also epitomizes, is that it speaks of strong objectivity, right? So somewhere along the way, its claims on strong objectivity are built on two sets of assumptions. One, what in the scholarship is called the thesis of epistemic privilege, right? That while everything is from a standpoint, right? Every perspective, every understanding of the world is from a particular standpoint. There are some standpoints that wield more comprehensive understandings of the world, right? Etc. Okay? And please note, I mean, this is very clear. The strong objectivity is a claim that there is no view from nowhere. Every view is from somewhere. Okay, but some views from some locations have more implications than others. Okay, now I think there is, but then this is not the only thesis that underlies standpoint theory or standpoint epistemology. There is also what has been termed the situated knowledge thesis, right, etc. In fact, I've actually tried to work through these two theses in looking at one of the pioneering debates in recent social science in India, namely the theory. What was that? The anchoring that comes in the work of Gopal Guru and Sundar Sarukkai, right? But I'm just there are certain kinds of issues there which need to be taken into account. Now, the problem arises because the two theses or the two assumptions that underlie standpoint theory, the thesis of what one is calling the thesis of epistemic privilege and the situated knowledge thesis, right, don't go together. They are in tension with each other, right? What does it mean to say that all knowledge is situated? Okay, but some knowledges, those that are situated, yield more comprehensive understandings of the world and so on. So I think this is an issue, and there are different ways in which the problem can be resolved. Okay, in my own course that I taught, Knowing the Social World, I work towards a solution to the problem, not necessarily along the axis of theory and experience, etc., that Sundar Sarukkai and Gopal Guru were trying to institute, but along a different axis, as it were, right, and so on. Now, so this is broadly what I am calling the truth problem. Okay, and I think there is some sense in which our engagement with theory and methods must also address the underlying concerns that lurk behind what I am formulating, or in my terms, what I'm formulating as the truth problem. Now, let me move to the second, right? What I'm calling the morality problem, right? Etc. Okay. Now, okay, that see this the as I formulate it, and the outline expresses it, that one is involved in critique about one is trying to analyze the world, not only with the intent of criticizing it, right, or negating it, but also putting in place an alternative morality, right, etc., or something more grander. And perhaps the truth problem could be resolved along these lines, that there are ways in which you can claim that although all perspectives are socially situated, there are certain perspectives, in the ways in which you develop them, they yield a more comprehensive understanding of the world, and so on. But I want to flag some other kinds of questions that come up here. Okay, I think on the face of it, there is an echo of Marx in one of the the standard echo in Marx, particularly from the thesis on Feuerbach. That philosophers only interpreted the world. The point is to change it. Okay, I've often ruminated about what that injunction implies. The point is to change it, etc. Change it in terms of what? What is the basis for these claims to a higher ground on which the change gets to be effected, and so on, right? Now, etc. Now, so the problem comes up because in the attempt to move beyond, or in the context of transcending or negating the world as it exists, one is thrusting a morality of their own, as it were, right? Okay, now I suppose I'm intellectualizing the issue here, but I think it's important to get at the intellectual ground of these issues, and work along those lines. So I think that's why what I'm stating is that the morality problem could accrue even if the truth problem gets to be resolved. Okay. In the sense that the truth problem gets to be resolved in saying that there are ways by which you can account for the fact that there are perspectives or accounts that yield a more profound knowledge of the world, and so on. Now, I think Weber, among the classical sociologists, at least as I begin to read him, as I have read him, has some considerations of this problem, right? Of course, although his own context in which he was instituting the problem was also very specific to the times in which he was writing, right? In fact, what is the ground on which he makes a claim towards a value-free sociology, right, etc. Okay, now, was Weber's claims about a value-free sociology or a value-free social science, particularly in that essay called Objectivity in Social Science and Social Policy, right? Incidentally, an essay which is attributed to Weber, but actually historically was actually a joint programmatic statement when he was taking up an editorship of a journal with others. So there were other co-writers to it, but nevertheless, the essay has got attributed to Weber himself. Now, and Weber was also alerting us, to the. He was, in a manner of speaking, instituting a certain difference between factual propositions and normative statements, right? And arguing that that even as uh, you know uh, uh, normative statements expressed in terms of values, something desirable or unnecessary, that each value expression could be analyzed. Nevertheless, there is a sense in which the sociological inquiry should not take a kind of a stand on those values, calling them desirable, some value as desirable, some others that are undesirable, and so on. Of course, again, it's important to see the backdrop against which he's instituting this binary. Uh, Between factual propositions and normative factual statements and normative propositions. And there is a sense in which one can argue that I mean, his claims for a value-free sociology was actually a statement against dogmatism in sociological inquiry, rather than perhaps trying to institute a binary between factual and the normative. And so on, but there are open kinds of questions. Again, this is the openness of the questions implies some kind of a resolution which might be necessary. Okay, now, okay, so that's why I think there is something in the morality problem, as I'm setting up. Which has certain kinds of antecedents in the history of sociology, as we receive it from modernity, are things that might be spoken about. I know there are important critiques. Critical theory instituted a whole critique of this idea of value neutrality, etc. But I think the philosophical issues that underlie that question of surpassing value neutrality or value freedom, as it were, that Weber was trying to indicate towards, might have to be addressed. Of course, there are. I mean, one is not saying that that the descriptive and the evaluative can be separated in the way that, say, Weber's discussion was, in a manner of speaking, implying, right? I mean, the descriptive and the evaluative are necessarily intertwined, okay, with each other, and so on. And I'm willing to argue that you cannot approach sociological inquiry, by seeking to avoid normative concerns, right, etc. Okay, how? I mean, so in this context, the morality problem also becomes an exercise in itself, which begins to which has to be instituted. When Weber instituted the distinction between factual statements and normative propositions, etc., and argued that normative, the ground of normativity could be analyzed, could be sociologically studied, but you cannot, you cannot express a judgment on them about whether they are desirable, or one set of values has to be desired over others, and so on, right, etc. So there was something radical even in that position. We spoke about value neutrality, right? But then somebody can argue that no, normative questions are quite central, and how do we go about instituting the grounds of normativity, and so on, and that's in that context I raised the third design requirements, what I call what I'm terming here the normativity problem, right? I mean, even if one is able to convince that our critique is not attempting to yield an alternative morality, there are still problems of normativity that could arise, and I think they come up even more starkly in the context of sociological discourse, because as I already pointed out, that the descriptive and the evaluative concerns kind of are built into each other, right, etc. Now, but before I just move into the normativity problem and the issues that I'm trying to institute there, I must clarify that these labels that I'm using, morality problem, the normativity problem, there is a large overlap between them, right? Okay, so maybe my labeling is perhaps not as accurate as it should be, but nevertheless, I think the kind of issues that come under that label have some distinctive resonances which I'm trying to indicate towards. Clearly, you can see that with the morality problem, and as I'm going to go into the normativity problem, you're actually speaking or thinking more crucially with the evaluative basis of sociology and so on. Okay, and I mean I think it's important to actually engage with how to think about the evaluative basis of sociology, or more generally social scientific inquiry and so on, right? Okay, and now, in fact, some years ago, I mean, that was a book which actually raised a considerable amount of questions in social science. There was this, I think, Danish Bent Flipjerg, who actually had this book called "Making Social Science Matter," right? And he tried to speak about an importance of a sociology focusing on values, right? And argued that social science is about meanings, values, and power, right? And argued that the evaluative basis of social science has to be anchored around certain kinds of formative questions and so on. Again, I want to so the normativity problem could be resolved along the lines that, say, somebody like Flipjerg is arguing, or arguments that you can trace back to some of the arguments of the critical of the Frankfurt School and so on. But I want to still keep the issues as alive, right, and open and important to be considered in itself, right? Now, so when I've said that in speaking of the normativity problem, okay, I mean there are still problems that would remain, even if one is convinced that our critique is not necessarily trying to set up a new morality against others and so on, right? Now, what are these problems that I'm subsuming under the normativity labeling, right? Okay. Now, I think a lot of this has to do with our arguments for value-laden science, right? Etc. Okay. Okay. And I mean, there is a sense in which one could always think of a standoff between the claims of value neutrality that underpin Weber and his attempt to transcend, so to say, the morality problem, as it were, and the counterpoint which argues for value-ladenness of sociological inquiry, value-laden science, and so on. Okay. Now, I mean, and I think underlying a lot of the claims for value-laden science is what one might call a fact-value holism, right, etc. Okay, that facts and values are mutually intricated with each other. The descriptive and the evaluative, the descriptive ground of facts and the evaluative ground of values impinge on each other, and so on, is one way in which one can think about fact-value holism, right? Now, but I think there are still issues within fact-value holism that we will have to consider. That's why I'm saying that arguments for value-laden science or a value-laden sociology have certain kinds of issues, also to, further issues to address. Okay, I mean, and I think all of us are agreed that a strict fact-value distinction, okay, that will require that we keep our descriptive statements or statements of fact apart from evaluative consequences, etc. That this keeping apart is never achievable, right? Etc. So a strict fact-value distinction is important. But I have in my own analysis of some of these questions and going through some of the advocacies of these claims of value-laden science, I've found that a striking feature of studies, whether asking for or against a value-free sociology, okay, there is a tendency, there is a particular view of facts and values that is taken. And there is a tendency to view facts and values as conceptually distinct, right, etc. Okay. Now, what do I mean to take? And please know, these are part of the normativity problem that I'm trying to raise. What does it mean to take facts and values as conceptually, as I said, conceptually distinct? Is one way of framing it is by saying that values, right, are filters. The values are certain schemes through which empirical content passes. Our facts are distilled through our values and our conceptual schema and so on. Okay. Now, I think there are implications. That's why I said this idea that seeing values, facts and values as conceptually distinct and formulating that conceptual distinction along the broad lines that I've indicated for you has certain problems, right, etc. Now, okay. Now, I think if one were to argue, now if values are just conceptual filters, okay, they inhere in us as individuals or as subjects, okay, and it is through these filters that we engage with the world, as it were. Now, so you see values as part of our inner subjectivities, our private world, okay, or subjective reason, and so on, partly as our preferences, etc. Okay, and so on. Now, both these assumptions, viewing values as filters through which empirical content passes, and values as part of a private world, which often gets to be expressed in our preferences and our opinions, etc., I think is something that will have to be engaged with. So that's why I think the normativity problem, it raises questions which, in a manner of speaking, at least in the ways in which I've rendered it, the morality problem is not traversing, as it were, right? Okay. Now, in fact, okay. Okay. Now, it is important. It is in this context that the ideas of a fact-value holism as the basis for a value-laden science becomes quite important, right? Etc. That there must be the possibility of the empirical adjudication of values, right? Etc. And seeing values as just filters or etc. Doesn't allow for the possibility of the empirical adjudication of values. Okay, that there can be empirical ways of defending one set of values against others, and so on. And the second, how do we see values? That values themselves, rather than inhering in subjects, are actually part of the world, right? And so on. Now, I mean, this is one way of expressing fact-value holism. There are other ways of expressing fact-value holism. In fact, for instance, if you look at Dumont's sociology, leave aside his theory of caste, which has other kinds of questions built into it, but the convergence of his whole sociological enterprise on what he called on the value question is premised on fact values, on the holism of facts and values, and so on. And there is a different kind of fact value holism that he speaks about, and so on. I will I will speak about that quickly in the last thing on the value problem, as it were. I hope so. So I think it is important that that the normativity question has to be addressed. There is a sense in which one might point out that the normativity problem that I'm raising is being pitched. It's being pitched onto a question of fact value holism. And somebody might argue that the normativity problem can be raised in other contexts as well. As I already indicated, fact value holism can be grounding a different order of work, as in, say, Dumont's work, and so on. So now I think if you have to engage with the full force of the normativity question, somewhere we will have to rethink the ways in which our lines of drawing the distinction between the natural sciences and the social sciences have proceeded, right? The older ways of drawing the line between the natural sciences and the social sciences, are unconvincing, and I've actually written on this question, and that there is a need for new ways of drawing the lines of inquiry, and so on. And I think in drawing the lines of inquiry between natural sciences and social sciences, there is a particular sense in which the normativity question can translate into one way by which the distinctiveness of the social sciences and the humanities could be set apart. I mean, it cannot ride on the question that we are interpretive, whereas sciences are explanatory, and so on. I mean, I think the normativity question, redrawn along these lines, could actually impinge on how we think about agency, questions of free will, as indeed questions about autonomy, and so on. I mean, in fact, there is a sense in which something of this. I mean, if you look at the history of the post-classical sociology, at least of the kind that Parsons was instituting, you will find that around the time that it was being announced in the 30s and the 40s, around issues of the action frame of reference and so on, you will find that he was trying to bring the action question into our frames of reference, and also trying to indicate that the action question cannot translate into a free will position, as it were. So I'm not saying that in addressing the normativity question, we need to take recourse to certain kinds of philosophical advances that have taken place. I think in the history of the sociological tradition, as it has enacted itself, both in its classical, both in its classical form and its post-classical rendition, I think there are ways in which this question can be, in a manner of speaking, addressed, and so on. What are the implications of viewing our actions as normatively guided? Okay, that we act for reasons rather than simply as a result of causal forces. How do we think between reason and cause? And I think this antinomy that often we construct, that cause is a factor within the natural sciences, and therefore the explanatory thrust is on cause, whereas in the social sciences, it is about actions, it's about meaning, therefore, and so on. I don't think that is valid. I think these reasons and causes, in a manner of speaking, impinge on each other. And again, there are some interesting questions in the philosophy of social sciences that will bear. bear me out. Now, in fact, so one can actually ask this question that in raising the normativity problem in the way one is, was Bourdieu, in speaking of the requirements of a reflexive sociology, instituting it in this context, right? I mean, the kind of what he calls the participant objectivation might actually be one effort by which perhaps the ground of the normativity question that, in a manner of speaking, underlies this sociology could be addressed. But again, I'll keep that open and so on. And I'll now quickly move on to the last problem, which I think is the most demanding problem, what I call the value problem. Okay. I mean, how do we think? I mean, over and above questions of morality and associated notions of agency, there is how do we look at notions of value and valuation across moral contingencies, across human forms of life, and the moral contingencies that undergird human forms of life, and so on, right? Okay. I mean, of course, somebody might. There is a sense in which some of the normativity issues that I've highlighted could actually be addressing parts of the value problem, but I still want to keep this apart, right? Now, as I already mentioned, for instance, the fact, I mean, when Dumo begins to theorize questions of value, the implications of his sociology open out a lot more, right? In fact, in the revised edition of his Homo Hierarchicus, his anchoring statements, the revised and enlarged English edition of the Homo Hierarchicus, which was published in 1980 or so, actually gives some indication of the larger questions that kind of inform his attempt to institute a value separate from equality, right? I mean that, and the value that he institutes is the value of hierarchy, right, etc. Now again, so I'm for instance, there, you know, I mean, what does it mean to say that the task of sociological inquiry is to commit itself to a holism about facts and values, and raise this on an ontological register, and not just in terms of epistemological views, as I've tried to highlight earlier. Now, the fact value question is about contending forms of life, and our attempt, you know, to kind of mediate between contending values, as it were. I mean, Dumo's sociology, at least in his later incarnations, okay, which finds expression in the final edition of his Homo Hierarchicus, sets this up in very interesting ways. And it's also interesting to see how Dumo's work develops post Homo Hierarchicus. And there is a sense in which one can argue that he was actually trying to theorize a modern value, equality, right? And he needed, I mean, to understand this modern value called equality, he needed to institute a comparative ideal, namely hierarchy. And he finds it in the context of India. I mean, his reading of Indian history, his reading of the sources of etc., may have certainly have problems of its own, but the larger anthropology, the philosophical anthropology that undergirds this attempt, is actually trying to think about the value problem along certain lines. In my own work, I've also found the work of Charles Taylor very illuminating, right? Because somewhere along the way, this question of value and valuation also implicates one of the central questions within modernity. And I've often found Charles Taylor's work useful in the sense that he constantly reminds us that, you know, that many times when we read modernity, we are reading modernity of its trivializing offshoots, right? And that while there is a certain instrumental rationality that undergirds modernity, there is also a certain moral topos, or a moral what he calls a moral ontology that underlies modernity, which one will have to address and so on, right? So that's why I'm saying that the value problem, as I'm formulating it, take on a little more of a historical and ontological register, okay, and raise questions, okay, on of a very different kind. That's why I say that in perspective, here are also questions about moral ontology, that the fixation within sociology with questions of formal and substantive rationality have tended to occlude. So I mean, so I think just to kind of wind up, and I think I've adhered to my 50 minutes, as it were. Now, I mean, this is only a formal schema, right? But for me, I was a little excited about this because I gave it some thought, you know, I mean, you know, one of the points of departure has been that, you know, among the disciplines, among the social sciences, at least insofar as India is concerned, the sociology has been the most reflexive, right? I mean, there is constant thinking through of its own assumptions, right? Constant reassessment of its directions, constant assessment of, you know, the limits of existing theories and so on. But it has not translated pedagogically. It has not translated into protocols for, you know, instituting a certain dialogue or bridging the divide between sociological theory and methods. I think the reflexivity in sociological inquiry that I'm talking about is actually, and in terms of the schema that I've tried to institute for you, okay, is actually trying to address this anomalous instance that you have a discipline that is constantly affirming, constantly reassessing its own directions and its foundational assumptions, etc., but not actually translating into certain kinds of protocols that could govern you know, meaningful encounters with sociological theory and methods, right? So what I've tried to embody, that's why I said this, and in fact I insisted to the organizers, to Suraj, to actually institute, because only the first part of my long outline was taken, and I think it missed out on this line, which was towards the end of my outline, which was that you know, I'm not trying. I mean, the emphasis is not to objectify reflexivity in sociological inquiry, and I think most of our many times we tend to objectify reflexivity in the context of our disciplines, but rather to embody or construct an active sense of its practice and embodiment as a way of integrating theory and methods in sociology. I think I'll stop with that and look forward to having this a small round of discussion with any of you who might raise up questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. I mean, that was quite a stimulating lecture which we had for the last one hour.
Rakesh, only thing is, okay, that's fine. No, I'm not seeing the other labels in front of me. That's why I was a little confused.
So they will come up as they speak on the mic. They should come to your screen.
Okay.